Hi, I'm Julia Kiter, owner and lead instructional coach with Instructional Coaching Services of Michigan. Today's topic is about developing teacher leaders through a vetting process that's systematic, sustainable, and builds capacity for outstanding leadership in your district. I'll be talking about a 5-phased approach, beginning with a pre-vetting stage and moving into how you can develop a leadership coaching network at your school and even within your district. But first I want to mention to you some of the problems of practice that I've seen as instructional coach working in a variety of schools across Michigan, from elementary to secondary schools and even at the university level. So some of the problems of practice that we're seeing when we decide that there is a position available for a teacher leader to thrive, whether it be in a school improvement capacity as an instructional coach or maybe even a literacy coach initiative, all the way up to how we look for administrative candidates within the district. Some of the problems that we notice include that there is often a random selection process for these leadership roles. And so if a teacher is transitioning even to a department chair role, the transition from working with children and this idea of, oh, we've selected our department chair because she is wonderful with children. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be an outstanding teacher leader. Sometimes also the teacher leader is selected based on the likability or the respect that they have within their colleagues, with their colleagues. Again, that single quality is not necessarily the only quality that's going to make them an effective teacher leader. And finally, what we're seeing is these candidates are often chosen based on the fact that they are just really good teachers. And what we're finding is sometimes they really like being really good teachers and aren't willing to transition to those leadership roles. So determining a system-wide approach that we use to vet these teacher leaders based on not only will but also skill. Another problem of practice that we're seeing is that there aren't really the sustainable supports for building capacity for teacher leaders or even offering them a sense of developing their own efficacy and belief that they can do the work. So with that comes this idea that we are not necessarily providing them with adequate feedback, timely feedback. We're not really giving them the opportunity to establish or maybe even co-create an evaluation system that really works for the role that we're asking them to adopt. So it's pretty willy-nilly, it's pretty random, and it could be systematized a lot easier and a lot better to get the results that we're looking for. And knowing that the demand for teacher leaders is high, administrators will agree that they cannot do their job without highly effective teacher leaders, but how do we systematize this approach in a way that builds capacity? And so finally, the other problem of practice that we're seeing is that we are not finding very good administrative candidates that have a strong background in teaching and coaching. So there's a lot of training right now for administrators on coaching, but if we vet teachers from within the classroom and teach them how to be coaches for their students, it makes an easier transition for them in their leadership role should they choose to move on to principalship or curriculum director or even superintendent, what that actually looks like when you've had an opportunity to practice in the classroom, practice with a small number of adults, and then with a larger number of adults. So I want to go through that process. So we first have our pre-vetting phase, and in our pre-vetting phase, we actually do a needs assessment with collaboration with the curriculum director, the principals, sometimes the superintendent, and the human resources department. And this is to ensure that we are, moving in a very back and forth vertical way so that we understand the role of our coaches when they work with students, when they work with adults, and when they work with administrators. So establishing that criteria and being able to put out an application or a request for an interview so that not only the people that are feeling like they want to adopt that leadership role, but also those individuals that have the capability to do that. Whether it come from coaching training, you have some background in coaching, or you have highly effective teaching status, or you're a respected member in your teacher community. Those are all features that we would put into the job description, essentially. And so finally, we at Instructional Coaching Services of Michigan also offer evaluation criteria for our coaches that we train. And so that is a moldable working document, so that with districts, if you're seeing that you would like your coaches to really focus on data-driven instruction, modeling what that looks like. We can certainly put that as far as an additional or highly emphasized piece within your evaluation tool for your coaches. But we have built in a lot of features within that really have been a collaboration from a variety of research-based resources to put together a very succinct, simple way to evaluate your coaches. So what I'm talking about basically is taking your teacher leaders and molding them into coaches and then eventually administrators in your district. So you're doing that all within, and you're putting a lot of investment within those teachers, not only to support their thrust into a leadership role, but also building the capacity and the sustainability for retaining really good teachers and eventually really strong leaders. So really our first phase to do that is to have your teacher leaders engage in a collaborative coaching relationship. So we have our coaches that will basically coach those individuals, and they have committed to that process. So they engage in an instructional coaching cycle, which is basically, let's plan our lessons together. Our coaches will do classroom observations. They will engage in that process with co-teaching and modeling lessons with the teacher and for those students. And then eventually to be able to look at that data to say, what is this telling me about my students? What is this telling me about me as a teacher? And what is this telling me about the potential that I have to adopt a leadership mindset? And so we collect that data, but we also have reflective conversations with those teachers. So they're engaging in the full process of the instructional coaching cycle. And so we want to really encourage highly collaborative relationships. So what we found over time is that teachers are really working in silos. Sure, they might have lunch together and they might hang out together after school, but are they engaged in highly collaborative, focused relationships with somebody that kind of has an overarching helicopter view of what quality teaching looks like and what teacher leadership looks like both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So we want to make sure that we engage those people in those relationships, just simply because if they're not willing to engage in those collaborative relationships, then they're not going to be an effective leader in fostering those collaborative relationships. And so we really offer a model of what coaching looks like, both in providing data and engaging with the instructional coaching cycle, but also with modeling behaviors, professionalism, an emphasis on what content is, best practices, formative assessment, all the things that you can think about that coaches should really foster in terms of conversation, how they do that in a modeled way. And so our coaches really take a lot of pride in the skills that they have to be able to nurture those collaborative relationships, but also with the intent of creating teacher leaders in every building that we come in contact with. So that's our first phase. And that phase usually takes probably between 3 and 5 months on average. And once we feel that the coachee or the coachee feels, okay, I'm ready for something else, I'm ready to expand on this, we've talked about the classroom, how can I move into phase 2? And phase 2 is the immersion of coaching competencies. And this is where we really introduce knowledge and skills of coaching practices. So we do that twofold, understanding the delicate balance between what's job embedded and what really do we need to call upon outside resources to be able to match what's going on in the job. So we don't exclusively work just one-on-one with teachers. We really encourage them to seek outside, maybe university training. The state of Michigan training has some training, even online training, so they can actually watch coaching in action outside of just their little microcosm of the school. So we really incorporate that into our phase 2, and then we encourage the fostering of a coaching network. So this program is generally best fitted for 2 or more individuals looking to enhance their teacher leadership skills and really to work collaboratively as a coaching network. So that's really what we're forming in phase 2. First, it's one-on-one, working with the teacher in his or her classroom, and then it's building upon that within the school or the district to be able to foster a coaching network. It doesn't make much sense to have a collaborative network if your coach isn't allowed to collaborate with other coaches. And so a minimum of 2 coaches in your district, and preferably in your building, will really foster that back and forth collaborative conversation to be able to strategize for what teachers need. And so the last part of that immersion phase is really practicing the fundamentals of coaching in a safe, efficacious way. When I first started my coaching training, I coached with my family, with my spouse, with my students. And students can be very forgiving, in crafting questions and maybe even missing some coaching opportunities. So we encourage our teachers to practice with their students first, whether we're talking about high school students or elementary students. And so that gives you kind of that safe space to be able to do and try, with your coach by your side, being able to watch you and maybe even show you opportunities where coaching can thrive. Conferences are a wonderful example of how coaching competencies really come into play. So what we want to say for phase 2, it is a bit of a longer stage and sometimes lasts throughout the remainder of the year. Sometimes it can be 6 months or more, depending on the practices that the coachee or teacher leader is able to demonstrate. And so phase 1 and phase 2 we estimate being about a school year's length long, knowing that there's time for practice and time to gather more information and time to get really strong feedback from the lead coach. So that moves us into phase 3. And phase 3 is the transitioning into seeking out feasible coaching relationships. So within that, our teacher leader developing coaches really enhance their skills and their knowledge, developing strategies and habits of what coaching actually looks like. And so they're doing that in ways not only with their classroom, they're continuing to do that with their classroom, but they're also branching out into maybe building one-on-one relationships with their department or with somebody else that they feel comfortable with. And so that they're allowing themselves the opportunity to practice what it's like to build a coaching relationship with somebody, what it's like to ask some really hard questions about data-driven decision-making with instruction. And so we support that by still offering them feedback, but a little bit more in a gradual release sort of way. So within that, we want our coaches or our teacher leaders to be able to establish their own coaching goals using that formative assessment, self-assessment model. We want them to see themselves as coaches and eventually at the end of this stage actually identify with themselves as a coach, and that they see themselves, I really feel like I'm adopting coaching through and through about when I work with my students, but also when I work with my colleagues. So this transition period is a little bit shorter. It kind of feeds into, back and forth from phase 2 into phase 3, and there is no aha light bulb time when they actually feel that way. I shouldn't say that. Sometimes there is that light bulb moment, aha, where they actually feel like I did something and I feel like a coach. So that's what we're really shooting for in phase 3. And so that moves us into phase 4, which is the final phase, where our lead coaches actually foster more feedback and are gradually on the side when we're looking at the coaching network that you have created at your school. And so these are leaders in professional learning communities. They're actually coached into designing agendas, modeling protocols for the professional learning communities, and they're all about establishing collaborative. So within the coaching network that you've created, whether it's 2 or 4 or 6 people in your district, they work together with unified goals, a vision, and practices of what coaching looks like in the district. And so that's kind of a non-negotiable, despite the fact that your initiatives might change. And so they're really seen as a collaborative, as a model for how collaborative networks should work, whether it's departments, grade levels, or school improvement teams. So the focus also for this last phase is really incorporating the standards for professional learning in order to design a curriculum for professional learning. So we map out, we take a look at the needs of the teachers, we take a look at the needs of the students, and really determine, how can we sequence and pace this out like a curriculum and offer some formative assessment practices along the way for teachers to be able to work more directly with a coach, and so that they have too engaged in a collaborative relationship with a coach, and they can do so with their colleagues as well. And so finally, we see this transition from, okay, I saw myself as a teacher, now I'm a teacher leader, I think I'm a coach, and I'm also a facilitator of professional learning. So this also happens inside of the district, but also outside of the district as you continue to market your school district and the wonderful things that you're doing. So we can also see the transition into leaders of professional learning communities as an administrator too. We see a really strong gap with our administrators in terms of having a strong sense of masterful teaching or considering themselves as instructional leaders. And so with this process, you may see the transition from, so what you're doing is you're building the internal capacity, drawing from your teachers, your teacher leaders, helping them practice coaching, and then eventually training them to be your top best candidate administrators within your district. And so in this most recent climate, we're really encouraging our administrators to act like coaches. Why not vet from within and train them to be coaches when they're working with children, then working with adults in small groups, and then eventually adults in a larger group setting. So if you'd like more information, I am available via email at instructionalcoachingofmi@gmail.com, or you can call me at 517-202-5258. Feel free to visit my website. I'm on LinkedIn as well as Twitter. I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.